All right, welcome back to another episode of The Clown and The Madman. Today we'll be talking about chapter 5 of the book of Matthew. So, when I first started reading this chapter, the first couple of things that I noticed was how much the word blessed is mentioned, specifically in the first 10 verses, or 11 verses. I guess something that really stood out was when he mentions blessed are the poor in spirit, and I believe we talked about this last time. I don't know if you remember who the poor in spirit are.
What did we say when we last talked?
I can't really remember, but I do remember it had something to do with the fact that the people who are poor in spirit have
Well,
never lost full disbelief in God itself, but had something that I guess for a while didn't allow them to fully believe, and those would be the people who are poor in spirit.
I know Alan Watts would say that poor in spirit would be people that aren't connected to or don't obsess over the materialistic things, or aren't rich. Well, aren't connected to materialistic things. I think that's what Alan Watts would always say. Like they're free from their grip, so to speak. This whole chapter was difficult for me because I think that it is, well, first of all, this is the beginning of what's known as the Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah.
which is, I think, recognized by everyone as a cornerstone of Christ's teaching. Now, the reason chapter 5 was difficult for me is because I find it to be heavy on verses that have a lot of different interpretations.
I would agree. Agree. Um, to go back to who the poor in spirit are, or why choose the words poor in spirit. I also thought of it as the same thing as someone who is poor, like in their physical life.
Mm-hmm.
He he works each day to get his bread, and as a spiritual person, you must pray each day to get your daily bread. I think there's sort of a symbolism there. And then someone who's physically poor in a way doesn't have time for unnecessary distractions and always attends to certain necessities. And if your spiritual life is poor, you will also always attend to the necessities. Sometimes the poor man lacks food, as the spiritual poor man will also feel abandoned by God at times, in a way.
Well,
So,
I wanna return to what you started with. You
okay,
said you mentioned the last time we talked when we were reading these verses.
yeah,
Did you restate what you said earlier? Because for some reason it's um not ringing any bells. Maybe
yeah.
maybe I forgot.
So
But it is interesting that it says, I mean, poor in spirit is a really weird phrase because it doesn't sound like a virtue, right? To be poor in spirit.
yeah, it's
It sounds like that's like a negative
but
trait
but
someone
then
might have.
after that it says, "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So,
Right, and so the issue with what I have by this, well, with this chapter, or why it was difficult for me, or why it'll always be a chapter that is, I don't want to say misunderstood because I don't want to imply that I have the proper understanding or that I know the truth, but there's going to be a lot of different interpretations, and so part of the problem, what it looks like to me, is it does come down to the meaning of certain words. What does it mean to be blessed? What is poor in spirit? And what does it mean when theirs is the kingdom of heaven? What does that mean? They're going to heaven, or does that mean something else?
I would say, well, what is the kingdom of heaven?
Well, it's some
Do you
kind of promise.
promise, accord, maybe?
Well, what does it mean to be blessed? Why is blessed used however many times it's used here?
To be perhaps,
Nine times at least.
it says, I just looked it up. It says, uh, there's a lot of different, okay. Made holy, consecrated, to confer or invoke divine favor upon, ask God to look favorably on. So I guess,
Favored by God?
yeah. I'm kind of have a feeling that the poor in spirit also means those that are humble towards God's blessings to them. You know, like when someone gets, I guess, blessed by God, sometimes they show off about it, but poor in spirit would be those who are humble about the blessings that God gives them. But then it gets complicated because was it really a blessing, or was it because you earned it? Like you actually put the time in to earn whatever you received? Then again, did it happen by chance?
Okay, what about verse 4? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
This
That
one,
that one seems simpler than, let's say, some of these other ones.
yeah, this one,
Pretty straightforward, right?
I would, yeah, like not hiding your emotions. I mean,
Well, those who mourn will be comforted. But why are they blessed?
because they are not hiding their emotions, I would say. Because they are, in a way, I think they're acting out how God wants them to act out. Also, if you hold in emotions, sometimes a lot of anxiety and stress could build up. Not just those who mourn, not, I think this applies to everything. And there are times to hold emotions, and other times, you should definitely show them, I would say. But it specifically says mourn. So I'm guessing we should show we are upset, or whenever something bad happens, but at the same time, we shouldn't. If we're connecting this to the Bible, we shouldn't, because I think later on it talks about how you should not look phased when you're fasting, or something like that. In the next chapter, maybe.
So, who are these verses written for? Are they written, is this at all talking about our relationship towards God? Or is this...
These verses
Was it-
are to his disciples, based off of verse 2 or 1.
Well, this is to the crowds that went up on the mountainside. Right? It's not
Well,
just his disciples.
it says, okay,
Right, verse 2 says his disciples came to him, but verse 1 says, now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside. Or maybe it is just the disciples.
yeah, because it sounds like
Well,
he's,
I don't mean who he's saying this to. I mean, for us reading it, what is this? What are these verses supposed to be applied to? Is this at all supposed to be applied to our relationship with other people, our relationship with the world, or is this supposed to be applied to our relationship towards God?
I would say,
Because the next verse is, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Again, what is blessed? Is it favored by God? I don't know. Is it something like, is blessed an emotion? Is that joy? Does blessed mean you're going to be given something good? Again, what does meek mean? And
Meek.
what does it mean to inherit the earth? So so let's look up the word meek.
Meek means quiet, gentle, and easily imposed on. Submissive, but also it
Okay.
means
So
patient, long-suffering. Well, I'm just reading this. The words
yeah.
are similar to the word.
So here's here's my take on the verse. If it does say the word meek, I think that's patient, humbly patient, before God. I don't think what this means is that you let people walk all over you, 'cause that's what it means to be
Right, right.
you know? I
But
think, because certain verses I'm reading here and I just feel, sometimes you read something and you feel, um, opposed to it, and the opposition you feel towards it is strong enough to where you almost can't see it any other way. I don't know if that makes sense. Like
yeah,
sometimes you
yeah,
can
yeah,
read
yeah.
a verse and you don't like it so much that you have a hard time seeing it through a different, perspective because you're like, I
See,
really disagree with this verse. Because I think what people do, I've expressed this before, I think we actually talked about this when me and you talked about, we were talking about denominations and we were talking about the utility of having a hierarchy the way the Catholic Church has a hierarchy. Because let's say for other denominations, Protestant denominations, you have a personal relationship with God, right? There aren't a group of people, or there isn't some guy that's
the
in some sense
messenger,
an authority.
or
Yeah, an
yeah,
authority, or
gotcha.
some guy that's like closer to God that speaks on your behalf, so to speak. You have a personal relationship with God. The issue with that is, I think everyone is guilty of this, whether they unconsciously. It's not something you think about doing. It's something that happens naturally when I think we attribute our own personalities, the, our own characteristics, our own personalities, maybe even our own ideals. I think we attribute those to God, or we, or you could say we impose them on God. And so we personify God.
Well, then it
We
makes it more complicated because God made us in His image. So then that would be like God looking at Himself in a way.
Well, it's
Uh,
complicated because there's the Bible verse, God made us, we're made in God's image, right?
Right, and then the symbolism.
Whatever
What does that mean?
what does that mean? Whatever it means, there's also the process that I think happens outside of that, which is regardless of what that verse means, that we were made in God's image, we also it would seem that we do a similar thing. We make God in our image, which is you get a person that's, once again, what were some of the definitions of meek? Some of the, like,
Patient,
I think
gentle,
one of
quiet.
them was submissive, right?
Right.
You can, you can, I don't know if you've ever met people like this. You can find a very submissive person, the kind of person that gets walked all over all the time. And, they're even submissive to the point of resentment. They kind of hate that about themselves. They can't stand up for themselves. And you'll have them, let's say, read this exact same verse, and they'll understand it differently,
Right.
and they'll look at it and say, okay, so like I'm justified, or it's
Well,
like
that's,
it almost makes them feel better.
I
Like,
would
oh, I'm
say
supposed
maybe those who appear meek or submissive or whatever, maybe they just have discipline of self control that others do not have. And I have to. I mean, I think later verses talk about this.
What do you mean people that are meek
Yes,
have, what'd you say?
the discipline. They have self-control, something that, well, some people lack. I would say a lot of people lack, in a way. And I'll save that point for later on because there's something I want to talk about later on.
Okay, but since we're still on this verse, what about inherit the earth? I think that's very weird. I mean,
Yours says earth, right?
yeah. What does yours say?
Mine says land.
Inherit the land. Yeah, you know what's weird? There's a distinction here. It does seem like it's talking about something like land or earth
I
because it doesn't say world, right? Because
no
whenever the
no.
Bible uses the word world, it's talking about, that's like a negative word. The world.
So the thought that I just had was our Father. I mean, if we're reading it based off the Bible, our Father is God, right? Our Father is God. So, in a way, what happens when, well, I'm not saying that God has died, but what happens when your family dies and they own property, they own a piece of the,
It's passed down.
yes. So, I think what maybe might mean here would be, or what is meant here could be that there will be something that will be passed down to us by our Father, and that thing could be, well, I have no idea. I mean, I would say heaven, but it it would say otherwise if it was heaven. So it's just, this is a difficult part. Like you said, it's very hard to interpret what this could mean. What is that land?
Is that at all for? I mean, you could make the stretch that this is in some way a foreshadowing of Christ's death. Like once Christ leaves Earth, we inherit it now.
Oh yeah,
Us, or we're the only ones on it now, right?
it could be.
It's in our hands now. Because inherit is a weird word. Inherit. You don't inherit things.
Yours says inherit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, mine does.
I had a thought and I lost it, so we'll just move on. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Okay, that one's more straightforward, I would say. That's like being,
Yeah,
be holy for I am holy.
the rest of these were, I would say, pretty straightforward.
Well, this is verse 8 and 9. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. What do you make of those?
Being of heart, they will see God.
They will see God.
I don't think anyone ever has seen God. Like, I don't think, well, Moses didn't see him, right? He just heard him.
Well, seeing God is a complete. Well, what do you mean? The burning bush? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, seeing God can be a different thing. Mean a lot of things. One thing that seeing God might be is being captivated, completely taken in by aesthetic beauty. Right? You ever seen something extremely beautiful?
Yes.
To the point of it being like a transcendent experience. You could say that you have seen God or looked at God. I think I've heard something like that happening to people when their children are born.
Well,
They look at their baby, and what they see is something like beauty of God. And I think when it says pure in heart, I think that would be like a characteristic characterizing what our perspective is. The thing that is guiding what we see. Like, for example, well, not for example, what am I trying to say? pure in heart would seem to mean the intention. So you're not looking
Intention.
at, well, you're not like the person looking at their newborn. They're not looking at the kid with some secret agenda, right? Some secret goal that they're trying to achieve. It's
Right.
just a certain kind of pureness or emptiness, just completely open. Um, I feel like there's something there, although I feel like I've
Actually,
articulated it terribly. I
I really
think
like that though.
I think maybe it's a certain amount of surrender that's required to see God or to have the experience that you then describe as seeing God. It's a certain amount of let go-ness or surrender, or I want to say pureness because the word pure is used here, but I feel like
Mine
when I say
mine says
hard time
clean of
connecting
heart.
clean of heart.
What about peacemakers? Who are the peacemakers? Or is he implying that we should be peacemakers?
At all times, at all costs.
Yeah.
I would disagree with at all costs. I think is peace good? Yes, if you can manage it. I think again, it depends on how you think of well what is this verse talking about? Is this talking about let's say like at peace with God, or is this interpersonal relationships between people?
I would say interpersonal relationships between people.
Well, I don't know if I would. I see I see all these verses written as more towards our relationship with God or how we're supposed to act towards God.
So what is
I sup-
defined
I
as
suppose I suppose it could be both.
what would be
Less,
defined having peace with God? Or how would you relate that
that's a good
God,
question.
peacemakers?
What would it mean to be a peacemaker between God and yourself?
Maybe
I don't know. I mean, it depends on how.
peacemaker among different religions or different denominations or
Maybe. I mean, do you think it's possible to reconcile all the denominations of Christianity together?
to get them together, like
Yeah, reconcile them.
like in a table,
Have,
like a round table. Like
have well, yeah, reconcile all our differences and make one big thing that everyone agrees on.
I don't know if making one big thing from everything would be possible, but I think it is possible to have every single Christian denomination sit together in a table and have a discussion. Because this is not only different denominations, I would say it's like we mentioned last time, it's cultures. Sometimes cultures clash against each other, and
Right.
that's
It
where
would be it would be cultures multiplied by denominations, right? If
right, right,
you wanted to do the numbers to see all the possibilities. Because you have all the denominations and then the way they're expressed differently in each culture.
yes.
Now, let's move on for now. I feel like I have nothing to add. Well, I will say this again. For me, it comes down to what are these words? Okay, so if this is the word of God, I need to know. I would like to know what he meant by these words. Did they mean something different to him? And then when we read them, we impose our own meaning on them. And I think I feel that way because again, no matter how many times I read these verses, especially verse number 5, I can't help but have this feeling arises, which is like I um, don't understand what this verse means, or it's not that I don't understand what this verse means. I feel like I can read the verse different ways, and what I need to know is I would like to know for sure what this verse means. Like exactly what does blessed mean? Does meek mean? Does inherit the earth mean? I would prefer to have more.
Well, I think that's the beauty of it, not knowing exactly what it means, which entices us to perhaps read more of the verses, more of the chapters, more of the books in the Bible, so that maybe, just maybe, we could get a better understanding of what is meant by these words. Because if if this is really God's word, and if He decided that this is what had to be on this book, then obviously He's gonna make this exciting for us to read, or maybe even, I don't know if exciting is a word. He's gonna entice us to read this by giving us these kind of things, and questioning, oh, what is meant by this or that, and then maybe by reading more, understand it just a bit more.
Well,
But at the same time, this also has,
but at the same time, our understandings will be different.
yes,
There's an element to, like what I mentioned earlier, where we kind of create God in our image. To some degree, that's a constant, right? Maybe what this book is supposed to be is something personal for each individual.
that's what I was gonna say.
Or it's not that this book was meant to be something personal for each individual. It's that that's how everything is, right? Because I can't escape the context of who I am. I can only read anything I read, regardless of whether it's the Bible or some other book. I can only read it as myself. Now, you can transform. You can go through a lot of things in life and transform, whether it's, a major or minor transformation, whether it's, whether you're a radically different person or not. You can then return to an old book that you read a long time ago and read it as a completely new book, and get new perspectives on things. That always happens with the Bible because of how complex the Bible is, because of all the interpretations that you can have on these texts, and because of all the, let's say, interlinks between the verses. So that is always the case, that whenever you return and reread a book of the Bible or a chapter of the Bible that you read in the past, you always read it and find something new in it. Or
Yeah, I think it's definitely also due to how you're feeling at that time.
yes, for sure, but the way I see it is you're reading it as a different person. Even though you might be only incrementally different than you were the first time you read it. But I think nothing is everything in this world is in the process of becoming something else.
Well, that also aligns with the fact that change is the only constant, which, everything is in the process of becoming something else. Everything is always changing.
Okay, let's wrap it up with verse 11 and 12. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Well, I skipped over 10. Let me just add 10 real quick. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I think these three verses are pretty. Give me a moment to remember the English language. It's by the book almost martyrdom, right?
Yes.
It's just like, dying for your beliefs. Like some variation of that is going to happen. Do you think
This is the topic here. Dying for your belief.
what's the topic here for this
Dying
entire
for your
section?
belief. No, for these verses, I would say.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's persecuted for your belief.
Being persecuted.
The the way the prophets were persecuted. But the theme, the overall idea is martyrdom, right? Now, does that at all? I mean, this is in context of believing in God or believing in Christ. Is there an element of martyrdom, something like dying for your beliefs in your regular everyday life?
I thought about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in a way. How a lot of people marched and protested in crowds about the quality
See,
of.
for me, yeah, but for me, that's still I want to say that's a big picture um, movement or cause, right? Because I mean, it would be the same for, well, for those listening that don't know, I'm Ukrainian, so it would be the same for, let's say, the people fighting in Ukraine right now and dying for their beliefs. That I think, or let's even use the what you just said about the civil rights movement.
Civil Rights Act.
Again, a large group of people that believe something, right? And they believe it strong enough that, like, yes, I am willing to die for my belief. That seems to be more like what these verses are talking about. My question is there something similar to that happens in your personal life? Maybe it happens all the time. Is there at all a part of us that, or is there something that we experience that's kind of like dying for our beliefs on a personal level, on the level of your own identity or on the level of your own personality?
Perhaps, yes.
Do you ever feel somehow, well, persecuted for who you are? Like, maybe you're an introvert. Do you ever feel persecuted by extroverts?
Well, it depends how you take certain things. What others say to you.
What do you mean? How you take
If I'm an introvert and I have, let's say, an extrovert sitting there right next to me, and the extrovert says, "Oh, why are you so quiet? Say something. I'm right here." I would not feel persecuted personally, but that's also with the way I am. Like, I wouldn't feel persecuted. I would just be like, well, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't know what to say because I just didn't expect to. How I view the world, I didn't expect for someone to talk to me. So
so maybe that was a bad example on my part. Maybe I shouldn't have said the thing about introverts and extroverts. This is just the first thing that came to mind, like a half developed idea. Maybe maybe I haven't quite got it right yet. Forget about the introverts, extroverts.
maybe
Is there?
if you okay,
Go ahead.
this is like personal. For someone just looking within themselves, right? Let's say they believe that they can run a marathon. Now, there are going to be certain things that you do in your present life sometimes that could get in the way of that, whether it's being lazy or not exercising, a bunch of things, not eating right. But if you really believe you can run a marathon, then you will not care if that part of you dies, if that part of you
What part of you
is
died?
gone. The part that is lazy, that the part of you that tells you to not eat healthy, part of you that tells you to stay home rather than go work out and train.
I don't see how persecution fits into this, though.
Well, yeah, it wouldn't fit in that personally, but I was just
Well,
talking about the.
maybe what I'm thinking of is there a persecution that exists maybe on the level of culture, right? Where
Well, I just
you're not exactly being persecuted for your religious beliefs, but there's pressure put upon you to act a certain way, and to varying degrees depending on uh, what culture you're talking about, or what it is about the culture that you're objecting to.
I would say you could be persecuted in a way if, well,
Right?
when
And
when I mentioned that thing, like you have friends, you might have friends that are so used to living that life, then they like talk something bad about you because you're trying to fix certain things. That's a form of
right, like
persecution, I would say.
if you are trying to transform yourself, or
Right.
you've let's say created an ideal for yourself, and you've decided that that's something you're going to aim at, or something that's important to you, and then there's a kind of resistance from maybe people that are close to you. Maybe you've decided
Yes.
you're gonna start working out, and or you're gonna go, let's say, better yourself in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes you get resistance from people that are close to you, like friends or family members. Um,
And that's what makes
d-
it tough sometimes.
yeah, and it depends on what it is, the thing you're doing. I mean, people there are people that, let's say, will go to therapy, and they will encounter resistance from like their partners, family members, maybe. And I think the motivation behind the resistance is, it's something like, if this person changes, it's like, then it's a different person. Then I have to treat them differently, or I can't. Maybe I'm manipulating them, or maybe I have the upper hand in the relationship. It's like a threat of, like a change in, I don't know, the dynamics of the relationship.
I just thought of maybe by them seeing you act a certain way or maybe change for the better, I think that also threatens the way they see themselves and their life. And that's why they feel so resistant on it sometimes, because it makes them uncomfortable about the truth of maybe you should do something better with your life. Maybe you should act a certain way. Maybe you should do something different. And I feel like that's what people hate the most, having to be honest with themselves. And that's why there's so much retaliation and so much resistance to those that try and do better, try and change themselves.
It's like if you've it's like if you'd here's probably a better example than the introvert extrovert thing. It's like if you don't drink alcohol socially, there's going to be a lot of persecution for that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, like, why aren't you drinking? Like, people almost look at you funny.
Yes.
In this culture, at least they do. Well, in a lot of cultures, but because what I want to do, one of the ways that I always interpret the Bible, or the position from which I'm interpreting the Bible, is that the words that are written here are somehow characteristic of life. They're a constant. And so that's the reason I brought up this thing about, uh, I guess you can call minor forms of persecution, which is like, is it safe to say that you will always be persecuted for something?
I would agree.
Like,
You
that's
will always be
that's
persecuted.
that's what it means to be a human, in some shape, to some degree. It's like, some amount of what feels like persecution, because you can't be everything and you can't appease everyone. You're going to decide that you're going to be one thing, or you're going to live one way, and there's all the other people that are doing the opposite, or living the other way, or doing the other thing, that that you now somehow stand in contrast to.
This idea ties nicely into the idea of human suffering, say, because when one gets persecuted, they suffer, and they suffer greatly, especially if those are persecuted by their family or the people who are close to them.
All right, next section is, for me, is about salt and light.
You are the salt of the earth. Is that what yours says?
Yes.
In verse 13. Now, this section was very interesting for me. I had to think about what salt meant when I was going over this section. And I came up with like 4 different. Salt is used. Salt back then was used to preserve.
Yes.
Salt was also used for sacrifices back then. But salt can also be attributed to destruction of things, specifically in the Bible. Another thing that salt does is it heals wounds, or it helps heal. Now, if we're talking about flavor, I guess it depends if you're a salty kind of person or a sweet kind of person. In general, salt makes food taste a bit better, enhances the flavors. And I feel like when you add it to certain things, it provides a certain contrast, which makes that thing taste better. So, we're looking at it from that perspective. Maybe we are the ones that add flavor to the things that would be bland.
That's interesting. What do you mean, like, we? Is that about believers? Is that just people?
I would say those who...
And what do you mean by flavor? We make things interesting?
Yes, in a way interesting, or taste better, or not taste better, but be better. By we, I mean those who follow the writings of the Bible, or try to at least do their best.
Something about that I don't like. I'm just not sure what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it. I think a lot of interpretations of these verses is that saltiness is something like our holiness or our righteousness. Well, I think the way it's usually interpreted is that. And I think losing saltiness would be us losing our holiness, or losing our righteousness, or backsliding, or losing faith. Now, my verse says, salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? Right? It's an interesting question. Can it be made salty again? I think there's an implication that it can. But then it follows it with, it is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. And I know other translations say, not trampled by men, but something like thrown onto a manure pile.
Mine says trampled underfoot.
So I think the pile of manure is a harsher translation of this verse, as opposed to just trampled by men.
So, salt back then was used to preserve meat and fish,
right?
I guess different foods. Actually, random fact: Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt.
Really?
That's where the word salary comes from. here, I mean, the disciples, I would say, were sent to preserve the world, goodness of it, like preventing the world to rot from certain things that make it bad. I mean, I think if this is directed to the disciples, used to preserve the world.
Now he says it says you are the salt of the earth. Okay, what about usefulness or utility? Is that
Utility of the salt, or of us?
Well, of us, because it says we are the salt. Does that at all fit into here? Or usefulness? Although maybe not. I mean, is this talking about useless people?
I wouldn't say useless.
Right, because it's not evident. At least I don't know if it's the Christian thing to do, a Christian claim to make that there are useless people. I don't know that there are useless people. So maybe it's not about utility. Maybe it's not about usefulness. It's if you have lost all your good properties, losing saltiness, you have lost your good properties. Well, what about the light? Because then in that same section it goes on to say that you are the light of the world. I mean, it's flushed out a little bit nicer.
I would like to think that when Jesus was alive,
an example for everyone, right?
Yes, when Jesus was alive, I would say that he was the light of the world, in a sense, in a way. Well, not of the world, perhaps not the world. Maybe just the area he was in.
Why the distinction when he was alive? Is he no longer?
Well, when he was alive,
is that our job now?
I meant to say in flesh, in human flesh, as a human. I would say.
And then we're supposed to be like Christ, since he's departed.
Yes.
So, but assuming, so what do you think about what I said about salt being righteousness or holiness, or let's say your faith in God? Losing saltiness is losing your faith. What do you think about that? Because I've heard it would seem to me that that's the consensus is that that's what this verse means. It seems to me that most interpretations are that. What do you think about that? Because then what are you to do if you have lost your faith? And you are no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. What does that mean? You're supposed to depart the church? Or is this a warning against losing your saltiness, so to speak?
I would take this as a warning. I wouldn't go as far as to say, yes, you'll just be thrown out and get trampled by men. Saltiness, I don't know if this is referring to faith. I don't think it is. For some reason, this makes me think of
again.
Well, I mentioned it being similar to what salt, what salt serves its purpose as, which is to add flavor, to preserve. Sometimes in the past it was used in sacrifices as an offering. And then it's also, I think it's mentioned in the Bible that whenever Lot's wife turned back to look at Sodom, she turns into a pillar of salt. So I was just trying to draw a similarity between that, where salt signifies destruction. But for some reason now I'm thinking salt could mean individuality, like your own.
Okay, what about your good properties? What do you think of that? Does that idea work? Your good
properties?
Well, your good qualities. Because if salt is losing its saltiness, then it's losing its quality to preserve the meat that you were talking about. They used salt to preserve meat.
I guess so. It would fit because that's one of the good qualities about salt, right? To preserve. So you're losing.
So what exactly has to happen to someone for them to lose their good qualities?
It's a good question.
Right? Is that kind
A lot of destruction in their life, I would say.
right? That you would have to be really broken by life. Is that kind of how the story of Job,
Mm.
ultimate suffering, but he still doesn't. Well, it seems he still doesn't lose his good
The salt,
qualities,
the,
right?
sa- the salt can lose its taste, but it never loses its form. It doesn't say anything about salt losing its form. It only says about
What do you mean by
taste. Well, yeah, like grain of salt or the physical form of salt. It could lose its taste, maybe, but it doesn't mention here about losing its physical form.
And why is that important?
I was trying to draw a conclusion from that since it only mentions taste here and not the physical aspect of salt.
Well, I kind of like the last thing that I just said about the good qualities. What has to happen for someone to lose their good qualities? And then, because right afterwards it says, how can it be made salty again? And what has to happen for someone to lose their good qualities and then gain them back again? And is that essentially describing what a religious transformation is? I mean, are there any good qualities that you've lost over the course of your life?
That's subjective. I would say good isn't the same for everyone.
I suppose it is subjective. So, but by your own account of what is good, was there a quality that you possessed that you lost?
I wouldn't say that. I would say rather than losing a quality, I would say I've built on qualities rather than lost. Maybe I'm fortunate enough for that to happen to me. Or maybe if I thought I was losing something good about me, I was quick to realize that and turn things around before the hole got deeper or before it was too late.
All right, well, let's move on. Salt alone for now. The next section, Christ talks about the fulfillment of the law. I think nothing really stood out to me here. I think overall what it was talking about is the legalism of the Pharisees, right? Which is
Yes,
they think they're observing the law, but they've somehow got it wrong, right?
they definitely got it wrong.
Okay, so you know what's interesting to me? It's something I mentioned earlier about the fact that we impose our own values, even our own personalities on God. To some degree, is that what the Pharisees did? Where there's the law exists, right? And then there's their own interpretation of it, and then it becomes that self-righteousness for them. It becomes that legalism where it's all about rules, which is the stuff that they've imposed on God now.
So you're
Here comes God,
applying.
God in the shape of Christ, and what he's supposed to do is somehow establish the truth, right?
So you're implying that the Pharisees and scribes they were wrong. They were wrong for putting their own or tying their own belief into the law or to the gospel.
Well, I don't know if that's what they did. Well, let's move past that because
I mean, it has to be that they were wrong or partly wrong because that made me remember about the new wine being in the old wineskin. It'll burst. It wouldn't be able to contain itself there. So maybe it's implied that putting our own interpretations
Okay,
could.
would you say that Christ starts talking about the law and says, I've come to fulfill the law, right? Does that mean he's establishing truth? To some degree, he's saying, okay, you guys have all these interpretations of the law. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the right interpretation. Would you agree with that statement?
I'm sure. I don't know if this is right,
Because
but
go ahead.
I think Jesus says, I don't know where in the Bible it says this. Maybe it'll say in Matthew or some books after this. But it says, I am the truth and I am the way, or something like that.
Right.
So
I am the truth,
definitely,
the way, and the life.
yes,
So
definitely.
here's the issue with that. The implication of that might be that there very well is one interpretation of the Word of God that is correct. Because it would be like if Jesus could come down again and do for us what he did for the Pharisees and the law and say, here's the interpretation of the Bible that is correct. Because you could say what we said earlier about the fact that everyone has their own interpretation of these things, or that the reading of the Bible might be a personal thing. Is that wrong? Are we essentially to some degree doing what the Pharisees did?
What is the right interpretation of the Bible?
I don't know. But it would be something like, again, like I said, if Christ came down again and said, okay, here it is. From the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Personally,
Here it is,
Christ
me,
came down,
and I'm saying it. Here's the right interpretation. That would mean, one thing that would satisfy is what I mentioned earlier when I was disappointed.
Right.
The words not having any meaning behind them, because anyone can read them and take it to mean whatever they want it to mean, to fulfill whatever they're searching for, whether they're searching to, if they want to make themselves feel better, they can say, you know what, yes, I am meek, and it's a good thing. I am, submissive, and everyone walks all over me. So there's that idea, right? Which is like, there could very well be one correct interpretation. And the issue is, or maybe we will never know the correct interpretation. But at the very least, what we can know is that every single interpretation of the Bible is wrong. Because
until the right one is
what?
Well,
no.
If Jesus personally, I was going to say personally, if Jesus came down again and gave us the right interpretation,
right, but because we are flawed humans, we can only read and interpret the Bible from our own perspectives. I can only do it as me, from the context of myself. That would mean that every single interpretation of the Bible is wrong, but what we can do is compare and contrast and maybe triangulate what might be the closest thing to the truth.
This makes me think of mathematics for some reason.
So the idea of triangulating?
No. There are these things called asymptotes, right? I don't know if you're aware of asymptotes. It's like a horizontal asymptote and a vertical asymptote. And those are lines that...
Right, it's like
lines.
We're forever approaching the truth, but we can never quite
really
get
there.
And you know what? Slavoj Žižek once said something along the lines of he was talking, what's the quote? He says something like, we lack the ability, or we lack the language to articulate our own, I think he says unfreedom. I think he's talking about our own, our own predicament that we might find ourselves in. But maybe we are incapable. In our language, we lack the ability to articulate the truth. It's like language is inadequate in some sense.
Do you believe that?
I don't know if I believe it. I think it's something that you can feel at times. That makes sense. I mean, there are things that you can't. Well, there are things that are ineffable, right? Feelings, experiences that you can't quite put into words. And if you do put them into words, you diminish them. Would you agree with that?
You can't put certain things into words, you diminish them?
No. There are experiences, human experiences, that are ineffable. You can't put them into words. When you do put them into words as best as you can, you end up diminishing them.
Right, it loses its quality.
Correct. To where the words might do it justice for you because you've had that experience and you can bring that experience to mind while also, let's say, describing it in words. But if you describe it in words to me, I don't get the full picture. There's something missing.
You have a point there.
So we may very well lack the ability to fully articulate the truth or the human condition.
Maybe we weren't meant to articulate it. We're meant to experience it or to feel it. The next section talks about anger. Now, this is the section I was waiting on, because I know you feel a certain way with this. Well, actually, it was another section, now that I think of it. But I guess it ties into anger. The section about retaliation and not doing anything if someone slaps you. Instead, turn your face so that the person also slaps that cheek.
Well, I mean, earlier you mentioned you wanted to tie something in with something else we had just read. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it kind of, I guess, ties in with these verses, but it also ties in with the verses that talk about.
Okay, right now we're looking at verse 21 through 26, right?
Yes.
For me, that section is titled Murder.
Okay. Mine is titled Teaching About Anger.
Right, verse 22, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin, but anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell.
Raka means empty-headed or foolish. I looked that up. Something happened to me today at work.
Yeah.
And it made me remember about these verses, which is crazy to me because, it's something that I had just read the day before, or even actually not even the day before. I read some of this before work. Had accidentally spilled something on me, and I guess the accident could have been avoided if I would have thought of things, but I didn't. And then someone from the kitchen states, and I didn't hear this person say it, I found out later, states, my child will be more advanced than these idiots that I work with.
that was a statement about you?
Yes. Now,
Okay. Made by a who?
I'm not gonna say the
Okay.
name. Not during this session.
But you'll tell me afterwards?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
at
Because
that instant, I feel like if I was a different person, I would get very angry and
well, so explain
and-
what happened exactly. This was
okay. So
somehow
I
your
was
fault?
doing, I was doing some side work,
Mhm.
finishing up side work, and I was filling containers up with ranch,
Mhm.
right? Stocking up the ranch, and I had placed them on my tray, and I accidentally hit my tray, and that made the ranches flop over onto me, and I spilled ranch all over me and on some silverware settings. And I guess I partly I should have thought, that wasn't the best place to put it, but I guess I didn't care enough. I didn't care enough. So he sees that and makes that statement. If I was a different person, I would say I would be angry because he made that statement about me.
Mhm.
But I could care less. I didn't take it personally. I mean, I could care less. And that's not me being meek or subjective at all. In fact, I would say the opposite. I would say that it was so meaningless, him saying that I didn't have to say anything about it or do anything about it, because I know who I
What
am.
did he say again?
He says, "My child will be more advanced than these idiots that work here."
I doubt it.
And I'm
I doubt his child will be more advanced than the people that he thinks are idiots. That's all I have to say.
yeah, and it made me. I mean, it made me think of not only these verses, but the ones that are coming up about, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or you have heard it say, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But rather than saying that, you should offer your other cheek. Like, kind of like it opened my eyes up to a different interpretation. About turning your head and letting the person slap your other cheek. It's like, okay, keep talking, because I know what's true and I know what's not true. Whatever you say does not matter. It will not hurt me because I know what I know.
I would disagree with you there, turning the other cheek. In fact, I'm not entirely even sure what that verse means.
What would you do in my position? Do you see what I mean when I say, okay,
depending on the
I find it-
circumstances? So, well, first I'd have to know exactly who this person is. I have a feeling like I might know.
okay,
Maybe. So, again, I doubt it. I doubt that kid's gonna amount to much. But again, I mean, if it was, I'm also quite arrogant. I have a bit of, you could call it a god complex, although I maybe not. Arrogant for sure. It's a flaw I have. I tend to I can very easily belittle people, or I think that's the big thing I struggle with. There's a few other things, but it's really just like the seeing people as below me because they might not be interested in the same, ideas that I'm interested in. Something like that. But I would, the circumstance here is weird because it's not like he said it to you. You heard that he,
Well, I myself didn't even
right,
hear
after
it.
the fact, someone
myself-
told you that this was said.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, given that circumstance, I don't think I mean, would I have let it go? No. I don't tend to let things go. At least not easily.
I used to be the same way, I would say. I feel like I would have, I paused. I paused when they told me that he said that because I was thinking of if I should do something or not, and I feel like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I would have. Well, I think it would have gotten physical.
Well, let's keep going through the chapter. Adultery.
Adultery. So everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This is interesting. It made me think of discipline again and not giving into our uncultured, wild self.
What it made me think of is, I don't know if the statement is true. Did we really commit adultery? How severe of a sin that is if you committed adultery by looking at a woman lustfully. Now, what it reminded me of is if you are avoiding, one way of avoiding, let's say, sin is avoiding the environment that the sin takes place in, and then also the stimulus that causes the sin or elicits the sin. Like because if that's partly at all what it's talking about, then it sounds to me like the idea is not looking lustfully upon a woman would aid in then not committing adultery, real adultery, not adultery in your heart. That's what I thought when I read it. And then
Wait, say that what? Say that again?
For say what again? The last part?
Would you just say yes?
So for example, the idea that I'm thinking of, for example, if you ever abused any substances, you will feel cravings for them in the environment that you have associated with the high, with that drug, right? I mean, I think you mentioned a friend that you had that smoked cigarettes in his car. As soon as he gets in the car,
Yes.
that's
the
thing, the environment, circumstances that triggers the desire. So when I read this verse, the first thing I thought was, I don't know if we really are committing adultery in our hearts. We look at a woman lustfully, but if looking at a woman lustfully is the stimulus that then leads to actual adultery, then it would make sense that not looking at a woman lustfully, would be the way to prevent committing real adultery. Who knows? Maybe we are all committing real adultery in our hearts all the time. Who knows? Now, the second part of it, the section, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body be thrown in hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Again, I think that highlights the severity of sin, because I don't think it's the Bible is actually calling for you to mutilate your body. But
yeah, no, that would be insane.
What's interesting to me, and I think this might be the other reason that I thought of substances as opposed to actual adultery, which is what it was talking about. I'm thinking the phrase sounds very weird to me because it says if the hand causes you to sin. It's almost like it started with the hand as opposed to, let's say,
The eye.
yeah, or it was the eye that started it as opposed to you. You know, the way it's written, it almost sounds the way addiction feels, right? Which is like there's you, and
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 then
then
there's
there's this other part of you. Because
physical you.
yeah, I'm
I
not
would say.
exactly sure how to separate it. There's, let's say, the physical addiction, the craving of the body, and then there's something like you that's like watching it, you know?
Right.
So I think that's why I thought of substance abuse and tried to make that connection, because it's like,
That's actually pretty good.
yeah, and if you talk to
Yeah.
people that did, they were addicted to some of like the harsher, the drugs that have like the really harsh physical dependencies, all of them, there was a period of time where all of them wanted to quit, but they were still doing it.
Tied to that physical addiction.
And that's a really that's a really weak feeling, where you don't want to do something and it's like here you are going and doing it, like it's like somebody else is driving almost. And then as soon as you get the dose, you get the high, you feel good, and you also feel just like terrible because you're not. Who's in control if it's not me? You know? I don't want to do this, and yet I'm doing it, and I continue to do it. Terrible feeling.
The next section for me is titled Teaching About Divorce.
Yes.
This is one of the sections I was actually most excited to talk about for a lot of reasons.
How so? Explain this excitement to me.
I mean, now more than ever, we see a lot of, at least here in America, in the US, we see a lot more people getting divorced. And
Sorry.
here in America, well, divorce tends to be a bit more prevalent in other countries, I would say. Just to put it out there, children whose parents have been divorced are 16% more likely to develop mental health problems, poor academics, increased health problems, and per the NIH, only 60% of US children live with their married biological parents. Now, divorce in parents can also lead to disruptive behaviors, which, might include substance abuse in children. And also, children of divorced parents are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, live in poverty, and experience their own family instability. This was research done by the NIH and other groups, organizations. So I would say divorce is a big problem. General.
You may have heard this before. Something like 55% of marriages end in divorce. Something like that. Maybe I got the number wrong. Maybe it's 50%, not 55. You've heard that before, right?
Yes.
Now, I heard something interesting the other day. That's wrong. Well, it's not wrong. It's skewed because you have to take into account the people. There's a lot of people that get divorced, marry again, and then get divorced again. So yeah, it's weird. There's like a lot of people that get married multiple times and divorce multiple times, and so the number is inflated, right? It's
So
like,
what does that do to
it's like,
the fact that they?
I don't know. Maybe you should ask them. Like, hey, why have 3 of your marriages ended in divorce? I would actually be interested in hearing the answer to that. But so the number might very well be something like 35% of marriages end in divorce, as opposed to 50. If we're not, if we're accounting for the fact that there's certain people that keep getting married and then divorcing again and again.
What if they have children each time they get married?
Each time, dear God.
Yeah.
I
Just
would
imagine what
say
that can do to a society. If what I read is accurate, just imagine what it can do to society.
well, I'm sure it is tough on the children. In fact, I would even make the claim that one thing that a marriage is for is the children. And depending on how seriously you are devoted to your children, or how important how important you see your position as father or mother, as parents of the child, I would. A part of me wants to say that. I mean, a part of me would want to recommend people like, look, is there some arrangement? Like, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice for the healthy development of your child? Would you be willing to stay together, to negotiate some way to stay together just for the child's development? Then you can divorce. I mean, it's a tough thing to even. Well, I mean, it would be a tough thing to negotiate, but it's a tough thing to recommend too. It's like, how old's the kid? The kid's 5 years old. It's like, do you think you guys can stay together till he's 18? Till he's grown, and then get your divorce. I'm not sure what that would look like. Does that mean you guys can see other people, but just put on a facade for the sake of the development of the child? Just an idea I had. I mean, I think one answer is maybe you shouldn't have been married in the first place.
Yes.
And there's also, I think I've said this before a long time ago, there's a level of commitment that has to be there. Well, that goes into a marriage. I think
a lot of people. Let's try and start from the root of the problem of a divorce. Why do people get divorced? Maybe they chose the wrong person. They didn't know how to choose the wrong or the right person. Maybe they felt like getting married was something that they had to do, so they rushed the process of marriage that led to a divorce.
What is that?
Maybe they come from a divorce.
What does that look like? The feeling you had to get married?
Because everyone else gets married at a certain age. So because everyone else does it, you do it too, or you want to do it.
Right. I mean, I know a couple that they basically got married because she was in her 30s now, and it was like, well, this has to happen because it's like I'm already in my 30s, Like, I'm not even entirely sure. I know for a fact she was pushing for it. I'm not even entirely sure how committed the husband was, the male was in this relationship. So we'll see how long it lasts, right? So for her, it was something like social pressure, right? It was like, well, I'm already a woman, past 30. I have to get, I should have been married by now. I don't know if that's a reason to get married. I understand that. I understand that as far as culture goes and as far as society goes, you might feel judged on certain things. That doesn't mean you jump into a marriage to alleviate whatever you might, consider a bad judgment of you or a poor judgment.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like persecution in a way.
Yeah. Right. There's cultural differences too. I mean, in some cultures, divorce is not an option. It's like it's not an option. No, you don't even consider it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Which I think I think that's the idea behind a marriage, is that we're tying ourselves to each other and we're in it for the long run.
Yes, after
you're
marriage.
Stuck with me, I'm stuck with you. So let's just get over that fact now, the fact that we're stuck with each other, and let's work out whatever we need to work out. I think that's the working idea behind marriage. I think what happens to people is they never have. It's not a committed. I think some relationships are casual relationships, and they remain casual relationships even after they marry each other. The marriage almost isn't in service of the relationship. Marriage is in service of, again, maybe the social aspect of it or the cultural aspect of it, or.
Okay, I think marriage here in the US specifically has become devalued, as one would devalue the feeling of God or the experience that we had mentioned earlier, through words. We devalue it, and I think it's put beautifully in
that it's been attacked to some degree, at some
attacked? No, not attacked, but just devalued. I feel like it's lost its value, what it really means to be married.
Yes, but lost its value. How? How did it lose its value?
Because of how easy it is, I would say, to get divorced in a way here.
Because
it's not easy, but
because of how normal divorce has become.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I feel like they're in America. The family situation is very complicated, or at least there's a lot of very complicated families out there. Multiple stepfathers and multiple stepmoms, and
I like how it's put in the book of Mark. Mentions the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two but one flesh. I think that explains how marriage should be, in a way. You become one.
Now, it does say that basically the only reason you can divorce your wife is because of unfaithfulness. Then it says, anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. That's, I don't think why add that? Why make that a thing when you're writing the Bible? What is so bad about marrying a divorced woman? What is the Bible warning against here? Let's forget the idea of sin, for example.
It's warning against, I would say, the chance of an unstable marriage.
Why? Because she's already divorced, and it was because of unfaithfulness. Okay, well, you could also make that distinction is the only reason she is divorced is because marital unfaithfulness. So maybe it's saying, well, don't marry a woman that is divorced because of marital unfaithfulness. Maybe that's what it's really warning against, as opposed to a woman that's divorced for some reason. Now, I know I've met people that believers that that are very religious, are very religious types, and they do take this verse seriously. In fact, I know some pastors, ministers that would not would not participate in the wedding if asked to, like to marrying a couple if one of the people is divorced. And then I've obviously met others that it means absolutely nothing to them. Not sure to what degree of seriousness where I hold this verse. What's interesting to me is can't help but think of chapter 1 where Joseph wants to divorce Mary. It's because of the implied unfaithfulness, right? It's like your wife is pregnant and it's not your
And
kid.
not yours.
Yeah, and that had to have been an awkward conversation. But you have a dream and it tells you it's okay. Next section for me is oaths.
What I took from this section was to be decisive. When you say something, mean it, mean what you say. And if you are unsure about something, don't say anything at all.
That sounds about right. I wasn't entirely sure why the focus was on swearing. Don't swear by.
What does it mean to swear?
It's like I swear to God, or like no, dude, I
Is that
swear
is
on
that
the
what
Bible.
is that what it means?
In this context, yes. It says, "Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne." I don't understand. I mean, it says simply let your yes be yes and your no no. It sounds like be a man of your word, but
Yes.
there's a distinction drawn where somehow swearing isn't being a man of your word. It's like it's like say okay, it's like I am a man of my word. If I say yes, I mean yes. If I say no, I mean no. And I swear to God I will do this thing that I promised to do.
Oh.
But that's different. That's not being a man of your word. Is it because of the complexity of life? Like you can't actually swear, let's say to God, like I swear to God I will get this thing done for you. Is it because nothing is 100% guaranteed and then that's a form of a lie?
Wow, that's a good way to put it. I didn't think of
Because if
it
you
like
say
that.
like, well, listen, and I'm saying swear to God because it specifically says do not swear at all, either by heaven or,
Right. God's
So-
throne.
So is the idea you say, I swear to God, like, I'll do this thing for you. And then you don't pull it off because whatever happens, the world's a complicated place. Sometimes life
Right.
throws curveballs at you. Even though you're up to this point, you thought you were a man of your word. And is it because it's a form of a lie? It's like because you can't actually guarantee that you'll get anything done. But that's
You can try your best to control it or to aim towards that and get it done, but you can't guarantee 100% that it will be
yes.
done.
In fact, there are no guarantees in life.
Yes. You can only get but so close to the asymptote but never really touch it.
So that was the one thing that I got out of it. It seemed like it was a kind of sin in that way, where it was a kind of lie. It was like who are you to guarantee that this or that will be done or will get done or you will do or you will have, or
In a way, you're playing God if you say that, right?
You're definitely like elevating yourself with a statement like that.
Yeah.
Maybe in which case, if you're doing that, then you're full of pride, or perhaps you're arrogant. Okay, next section, eye for an eye. You had something you were saving?
Well, it was what I mentioned earlier about anger, and I guess I tried tying it to this section as well.
You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you.
What would you define as being mentally strong?
That's an interesting segue. Where's this coming from?
It's coming from, rather than, doing something about someone striking your cheek, slapping or turning the other way for them to slap the other cheek. I think being mentally strong can tie into this because you're not giving into what your uncultured or wild version of you would do, which is to lash out and to hit a person back or do more damage than they did to you. Did Jesus strike the Roman soldiers that struck him?
When he was being tortured?
Yes. Or did Jesus want violence when they were taking him from
the guy's ear off?
Yes. He had the power to do everything against them, or to them, sorry, but did not choose to do that. Instead, he healed the guy. What does it mean to be mentally strong? Is it to withstand certain things said about you, or certain things are acted upon you, done to you? Because today, when that thing happened, that's actually what I thought of. I don't want to elevate myself as I don't know, arrogant or anything like that, but I thought, okay, might have said this, but like it'll only hurt me more if I do something about it, because then what he says is true enough for me to get bothered by it and do something about it.
Maybe the reason you weren't bothered by it is because it's not true. And maybe you're confident enough to know it's not true.
Yes.
Okay, so that's something different. That's not some great moment where you displayed some Christ-like virtue and you were a bigger person and you let it go. It just wasn't true to begin with.
Well, wasn't that what Christ did? In a way, he knows what he can do. He knows the truth. So he, in a way, did not give it that much importance.
Give what that much importance?
The fact that they did stuff to him. The fact that they,
Right, the fact that he could have called down a legion of angels and
yes,
wiped them off the face of the earth.
Yes.
Well, on the one hand, I mean, I will always argue this. I will always disagree with these verses. I will always argue. Now, am I forcing an argument here? Do I actually have something to offer? I don't know. Was Christ fulfilling God's will, Christ was free to not fulfill God's will, would he have acted differently? And then there's a significance of what Christ's life, what his sacrifice meant in the bigger picture, and we lose sight of that if we try to somehow argue about specifics, and then out of the specifics, it seems somehow irrelevant to me whether or not Christ fought back or took vengeance on the soldiers that were torturing him. Christ is the man that sacrifices himself for the improvement of being. Okay. Now, why he was tortured in this way or that way seems to me to somehow be of less importance in the grand scheme of things. Now, the tooth for a tooth, eye for an eye thing, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also.
I wouldn't completely dismiss that it's of less importance, the fact that he was tortured a certain way. I would never dismiss that as less important, because in the desert, he was, in a way, he suffered, and he was tempted. He was going through a lot of things, and he was tempted by the devil. And I feel like his torture by the Roman soldiers and others could have been a temptation by the devil to maybe, say that he is not Jesus. He was the one that did not say certain things to alleviate him from the pain. But regardless, he said he was him, and the fact that he went through the torture and pain shouldn't be dismissed or put as less important. I think it carries a lot of importance.
Say that again. What carries a lot of importance?
The fact that he was tortured by the Roman soldiers physically.
Yes, it does,
Because
but also no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because it doesn't in as far as the thing that he was fulfilling, the image, could still fulfill the role of Christ without being specifically tortured one way or another, physically. They could have beat him with one thing as opposed to with a different kind of whip. They could have put a different kind of crown on his head. So I think there's a level at which the specifics of his torture don't matter to what he symbolizes. Yes, it is important that he suffered, and that it was physical suffering, and not just the mockery that went along with it. But the idea you presented was that Christ doesn't take revenge on the people torturing him. I mean, yes and no.
Yes.
He's coming back, right?
Yes.
And those people are going to be in hell for eternity.
He's not taking revenge physically or at that moment, but spiritually, I mean, it's not taking revenge. It's just them not. It's them not. How do I explain this?
Well, here, I'll say this. I understand the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing. That can be, if you really get, that's the pettiness of it, right? It's eye for an eye. It's like, I have to, do the exact same thing to you. I understand that. If an evil person strikes me on my right cheek, under no circumstances will I just turn the other cheek to him. Not doing it. I've heard these verses preached differently by different preachers, different ministers, different schools of thought, so to speak. Some were saying that in the customs and traditions of those times, there were certain things like you could like when you slapped a slave, you had to either do it with the front of your hand or the back of your hand, because a slave was not worthy of a certain amount of respect to be slapped with a different side of the hand. I think you were supposed to backhand him as opposed to slap him with the front of your hand, and
Wow.
or it had to be your left hand or your right hand. It was something like that. And I think, well, one way I've heard this preached is that essentially Jesus is telling the Jews, like, get struck, present them with your other cheek, because they're not going to strike you again. So it's a form of rebellion. It's a form of, could say standing up for yourself. I mean, you're calling the person out. You're seeing how far they'll go. By that same token, when it says if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. What I heard said about that was that at the time when Roman soldiers traveled, they could make you carry their stuff for them for, well, let's say 1 mile. They were legally allowed to do that, but only up to 1 mile. They could then be in some sort of trouble if they forced you to walk more than 1 mile. So what he's telling, essentially, I think the idea is that what he's telling the Jewish people is, walk with him too, like willingly, and they'll never ask you to walk with them 1 mile, because they force you to walk the 1. Now you're walking 2 miles with him. You're not you're committed. You're not giving. They're trying to get their things back from you. You're like, no, I'm walking 2 miles with you. Now they're in a vulnerable spot because they can face whatever the consequences of that were, and so now they're not going to ask you again, because they know, like, this this crazy group of people, they're going to do this thing where they'll walk 2 miles with us and get us in trouble. I've heard it preached that way. I don't know how true that is, or how true that was or wasn't.
What about verse 40? If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well.
I don't know what to make of your tunic and your cloak. If I remember correctly, there was some distinction between, I feel like there's some importance. There's a distinction between the tunic and the cloak. I don't remember what the difference is. One is like an undergarment. The other thing is the outer garment, right?
I think the cloak is the outer garment.
The tunic is the undergarment.
Yes.
I think there was some distinction there, but I don't remember anything specific about regarding the previous point of view.
It says, I just looked it up. It says the cloak was used not only as a jacket or overcoat during the day, but also as a covering to sleep under at night. By Mosaic law, the outer cloak was an inalienable possession that could not be withheld from a debtor overnight.
Could not be withheld?
Yes.
Meaning even if someone owes you money or is in debt to you, you can't take their cloak from them.
Yes.
It is an interesting verse. I don't understand why someone's suing you for your tunic. Is that the same idea that I just mentioned? Is you have an inalienable right to your cloak, then it's a similar kind of... It's a similar sentiment. Same as going 2 miles and then you're forced to go 1. They can sue you for your tunic, but they can't sue you for your cloak. Is that the idea?
I'm thinking maybe they would sue you for your tunic because it wasn't the same material as your cloak, or it wasn't the same material as the other things you were wearing. And I know that it was a law to wear the same material, that you cannot wear clothes made from two different things, right?
I don't know. First time, first.
Well, I think it was Jewish law.
Oh yeah, first I'm
back
hearing
then.
of it.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's about that.
I will say this: I see no utility in turning the other cheek. It's what I mentioned earlier, which is I can only read these texts in the context of who I am, what my experiences have been, and that's the best I can do. And what I inevitably end up doing is imposing my own perspective on it, or
Your own belief.
yeah, my
About
own
certain
belief
things.
about it. Some of it may be even motivated by something. I may even be imposing what I want it to mean, as opposed to what it actually means. All I can say is I'm not turning the cheek, and I see no utility in turning the cheek.
The last section for me is titled "The Love of Enemies."
So the first,
The last verse stood
be
out to
perfect,
me.
therefore is your heavenly Father is perfect. Right, that's like be
Yes.
holy, for I am holy.
How can we be perfect? We are imperfect beings. I just don't. I tried to understand that, but I couldn't.
Well, I think that verse is a call to, yeah,
Aim
I
at
think
that, or
it's an aim. But the verse that stood out to me is 46 and 47. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? And not even the tax collectors doing that. And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that?
it's really easy to love people who love you.
Right. You almost, that's default. Or it's like you're gonna love
Yes.
people that love you, right?
Yes.
There's a number of reasons you should love your enemies. Sometimes your enemies tell you the truth. When
That's one way to put it.
people
Yes.
that love you may tell,
Alter the
tell you
truth,
lies in order to preserve your feelings, whereas your enemy could maybe they're trying to hurt you, or maybe they're trying to.
but someone that truly does love you will tell you how it is because they love you and want to look out for you.
Ideally, yes. Like if you actually cared about me, you would tell me the truth, as opposed to trying to preserve my feelings in the short term.
Yes.
Those last two verses that I read, I think they do a good job of the same way the final verse is like a call to aim. It does bring up a good point, which is like loving only the people that you love, or the people that love you, or the people that provide you, fulfill some need for you. Like that's, everyone does that. So I think the idea is we're called to be something more or something greater, because everyone does that. It even says the pagans do that, you know, the atheists do that, the unbelievers do that,
Yeah, that's the easy part.
yeah,
But
loving the people that serve you in some manner or that love you. That's, I want to say it's default. It's so easy that you don't have to you don't put effort into liking the people that fulfill something for you.
it brings me back to the conversation we had about culture, or what we are before culture. But obviously, if someone does something to us that is good, we're going to do something in return that is good, I would say. Like the dog and the human, or the wolf and the human's first relationship. The human gave food to the wolf or the dog, and the dog protected and looked out for the humans. So there is some way to connect that to default to our default setting.
Well, that's all for today.
Next time we'll go over chapter 6.
Yes, because I think chapter 6 is going to be just as long as chapter 5. Well, most likely
Thank you
also
for
be a standalone chapter. Thank you for those of you that tuned in. If you clicked the video on accident, we thank you anyway, because engagement is engagement. Till next time.